Okay, welcome back. So in the first part of this series, we went through the commands we'd use to generate 4 sets of keys. 2 elliptic curve keys. We've got EC key 1 and EC key 2, and then 2 RSA keys of different sizes. We showed you how to generate the keys at different sizes with RSA and how to use the gen RSA command. And then with elliptic curve keys, we showed you how to generate a parameters file and then how to use that parameters file to generate keys or generate the keys directly, depending on what you need for the day. What we're going to be doing in this part is using those keys to generate certificates. So an SSL certificate or TLS certificate includes a public key. And since each of these private key files also includes a public key, what we're going to be doing is using these private keys to generate, using these private keys to insert a public key into a certificate. And that's the plan for this next section. Ready to go?
Ready to go.
Awesome. Cool. So again, we're using the OpenSSL cheat sheet to kind of like base all the commands that we're doing. And the section that we're going to be using on page 2, which is scrolling to the right. Here we go. Cool. So we are going to be using this section of the OpenSSL cheat sheet. And now there's a lot going on. We've got these commands which generate a CSR, these commands which generate self-signed certificates. There's a lot of overlap in those commands. So really teaching you the self-signed certificates commands will also teach you the CSR commands if you need to go that direction to submit your CSR to a public CA to get a signed certificate. Then obviously there's a lot of these notes, and these notes apply to both the CSR and self-signed commands. But we'll step through those one at a time. To keep things simple, we are going to start with generating. Make that a little bit bigger as well. So we're going to start over here and generate a self-signed certificate. And the command we're just going to use is directly over here. Now, the difference between generating a self-signed certificate and a CSR is really this first argument over here. -x509 will generate an x509 certificate, which is the standard we use for what goes into a certificate. And then -new will generate a CSR. The OpenSSL utility we'll be using is OpenSSL REQ. REQ stands for Certificate Signing Request. It's the utility you would use to generate, inspect, and play with CSRs, or in this case, generate a self-signed certificate. So we're going to be generating a self-signed certificate. So we're going to do -x509. And what we are going to be inserting into the certificate is a particular key. And then we'll specify a file name. That's what's going on here. We'll insert a particular key, and we'll specify a file name for the output of the certificate. And so if you're following along and you have these keys, you can do the exact same thing that I'm doing. So OpenSSL REQ space -x509 key we'll start with the 2048-bit key. It doesn't really matter which we use, but we'll start with this one, and then the file name we'll use it. We'll call this guy RSA CERT 2048.10. Keep it simple. Now, when I hit enter, it's going to ask me for a few things. So if you think about the purpose of the certificate is really there to identify something, most commonly a website. And what you'll see is the websites are going to be identified with what's known as a distinguished name format, or the DN format. The DN format is a hierarchy of attribute value pairs. And what's happening here is it's going to ask me for each of those attributes and values that I want to include in the certificate. To give you an example of what we're going to be doing, let me show you. So if I go into any website, let's go packetpushers.net. Packetpushers.net is accessible via HTTPS. If I click this button, go over here, connection is secure, I can click this guy. It'll tell me, cool, certificate is valid. I can click that, and we can actually look at the content of the certificate. If I go over to details, you'll see inside this certificate are a bunch of different fields. And if I click on the subject, you'll see a bunch of information as it pertains to Packet Pushers public certificate. Looks like Packet Pushers is behind Cloudflare. Awesome. Cloudflare is an awesome company. But you'll see a common name. That's what the CN is. The O. I don't know why that's so small, but hopefully you guys can zoom in on the screen. I don't know how to make that bigger. In any case, that's just the reference. This is what we're going to be typing into the certificate that we are just about to generate. So first, it's asking me for a country name. I can accept the default based upon my installation of OpenSSL of AU, Australia, or I can specify something new. We'll go with US. State, we'll go with Washington. Locality, that's city, we'll go with Seattle. Company, we'll go with Practical Networking. OU, we can leave that. We can just hit enter and skip that. and then we come to the common name. Now, this is the important one. This is the one that pretty much has to be there in all certificates. And to keep this simple, we're just going to say we own the website RSA-CERT2048.com. Obviously, we don't, but this is a self-signed certificate. So
no, you said you highlighted this common name field because this field is the one that needs to match what's in your address bar. Effectively, we're talking about a website URL. The other fields are there informationally. They're relevant if someone were to inspect the certificate and read them as a human and find out information, but it's not going to cause a padlock fail in your address bar if they're not set to whatever value. They're in a sense they're arbitrary, but again, that common name, that's the big deal.
Correct, absolutely. Now, since you asked, notice that the common name of the Packet Pushers website was something cli.cloudflare.something or other, whatever the case, but it didn't actually match packetpushers.net. So yes, the common name is looked at, but there's also one other field that's looked at to match the address bar. And I'll show that to you later on in this series. So yes, the common name, but also one other field. The rest are just there. That's the stuff that the certificate authority would be validating if you're actually getting a signed certificate. They're like, are you really in the US? Are you really this organization? Are you really in this state, et cetera, et cetera. But it's not actually looked at by the browsers. Okay, so email address, we'll enter, awesome. Now, if I go ls, you'll see I currently have a new file. Where is it? Right here. New file in my directory, RSA-CERT2048.pen. You notice that didn't exist before. If I do a cat of that file, RSA cert, you'll see that it's going to look similar to the key files that we were looking at before, with the exception of the first line here is going to say begin certificate and correlating to that end certificate instead of our private key files, which had begin and end private key. Oops, key 512. That's what the private key files look like. Now, just like before, this is the PEM format, which is the base 64 encoded version of the certificate. To actually look at the contents of that certificate, we're going to have to use another command in OpenSSL, and I have that command in the OpenSSL cheat sheet as well. Notice just below we have this section over here, which is going to spit out the contents of an X509 certificate as human readable text. And that command is OpenSSL X509. We'll feed in the cert we just created, and we're going to ask for the text version of that certificate. If I enter here, we are now looking at the content of the certificate we just generated. And notice the subject field includes all the stuff that I typed in myself. Notice the common name was RSA-CERT2048.com. And then all this other stuff in here. Also notice inside this certificate was a public key, and everything that I'm highlighting right now was included in the public key, or rather is considered the public key of this particular certificate. Notice that's two values, a modulus and an exponent. Those are the same values we highlighted earlier when we looked at the private key files, where I mentioned that that is what is considered the public key. This modulus and exponent are going to match the modulus and exponent value in the private key file which we use, which was RSA key. We use a 2048-bit, no out text. So there's going to be a lot of scrolling here, but we'll do a quick example of it. This modulus and exponent are what was inserted into the certificate as the public key that we generated. You'll notice the last 4 digits in hex E11D are also going to be right here in the certificate itself. So that's generating a certificate with a key you already have. Any questions so far?
A point to highlight on the public and private key elements. The public key is truly that public. Anybody can have that public key. Anybody will have that public key. It is truly public information. The thing you need to protect on your side as you're generating these certs is that private key. Right, Ed?
Correct, absolutely. And really the crux of it is these two prime numbers. So if you get into RSA math, those prime numbers are what are used to generate every other number in this certificate. So if someone has these two prime numbers, they have your private key. So obviously, we've just done this on a screen share. We're recording it. We're putting it on YouTube. I've given away the keys to the kingdom. I've given away the private keys of this particular key. So don't use this in production.
Don't do this. Don't sync your keys to your public GitHub repo, etc.
Don't copy and paste this into Pastebin or anything like that. This is the sensitive part of this file. These two right in here.
Now these are self-signed. The one we just did was a self-signed cert. Meaning, from a cryptography perspective, it works fine, but the certificate that is being presented to the browser does not come from a recognized certificate authority. And so if you were to try to use this in the wild, it would come up, it would be flagged as this is, you really can't trust this.
Right, absolutely. Yeah. And the official, and so that's perfectly, I'm glad you brought that out. And the official definition of a self-signed certificate is a certificate where the subject field matches the issuer field. Notice the subject field, I'm going to highlight both these, but you can skip the validity dates. Notice the subject field and the issuer fields are, bit for bit, 100% the same. So essentially, me, Practical Networking, who owns the site, RSACert2048.com, is asserting that I am Practical Networking and I own the site RSACert2048.com. So you can see how there's a little bit of suspicion there where I'm like, wait a minute.
You're a trustworthy guy though, Ed. Come on, man.
I think so too. I think so. Well, thanks for mentioning it.
But so if we use a service like Let's Encrypt, they are going to be the issuer in that case, and they are taking on the responsibility of being a recognized certificate authority that has issued that and validated that you are who you say you are, and yes, indeed, we can issue you a certificate based on the work that they did as a certificate authority to validate that you are who you say you are.
Absolutely, absolutely. And in fact, we can actually see it in action. If we jump on Packet Pusher's website again and take a look at their certificate, notice the subject indicates this is who I'm claiming to be, and the issuer is something different. It is Cloudflare's Elliptic Curve Certificate Authority -3. So Cloudflare rather has their own certificate authority, and they have done the due diligence to verify that this particular certificate is definitely owned by Cloudflare. Now, just since we're here, you had mentioned about this is the name that's looked at in the browser. Notice the browser includes packetpushers.net, but the common name includes this guy, sni.cloudflaressl.com. The other section in a certificate where you're matching what you typed in the address bar versus what's in the certificate is what's known as the subject alternative name section. You see that in here, SAN. And you'll notice that in here, there's 3 entries, and one of them is packetpushers.net. So this is why the browser was like, okay, cool, we're good. We can trust this particular certificate to encrypt information for packetpushers.net.
But it allows Cloudflare to send a encrypted and blessed with a certificate authority sort of a connection and sit out in front of packetpushers.net, which is in fact exactly what's happening.
Right, absolutely. And as we continue in this series, one of the exercises we're going to do is we're going to pull down a few other live certificates, and we're going to look at some of the things we can kind of discover from the certificates, and to include the SAN field, the subject alternative name field. In this demonstration, we're not going to create SAN certificates. That is something we do in my TLS course. So if that's interesting to you, we actually create a full certificate authority and use that to sign certificates that are SAN certificates and everything. So if that's of interest to you, definitely check out the practical TLS course. In any case, where we are here is we have just generated one certificate based upon this key. What we are going to do next is generate another certificate. Make sure, yeah, okay, cool, don't need that. Awesome. Actually, I'll also show you some other commands because we're going to use these again later on. Notice in here, we use this command, which converts the entire certificate into human readable text. That was OpenSSL X509 in RSA cert -no out -text. So it converted everything into human readable text. But there are times when you want to extract just specific pieces of information from a certificate, and that's what you would use this section for over here on the right. And so notice you can, instead of extracting all the text, you can just say, hey, I just want to see the subject. There's the subject that we put in. I just want to see the issuer and the subject in this case. I want to see the validity dates. A bunch of different options you can have. That's all here for your convenience in the cheat sheet. With that in mind, we can talk about some of the additional options. Now, we're going to generate another certificate using the other key. So we generated the first certificate using this key. For kicks, we're now going to generate another certificate using this key. Scroll up just a minute there. So again, the command is OpenSSL REQ. I'm going to say I want to generate a self-signed certificate. The key I'm going to use is the 512-bit key just for kicks. And we're going to call this RSA cert 512.pem. Now, again, if I enter here, it's going to prompt me for all these DN attributes. But if I Control-C out of that, I can actually specify those attributes in the command itself. That's what these notes are telling us. The first note is telling you over here. It's up there. Notice that you can specify the DN attributes using the -subj subject argument. And then in quotes, you specify all the DN attributes that you want. So you can do, state, country, locality, city, that is, organization, just like we did before, or you can just specify the common name to keep it simple. That's what we're going to do for this next section. This way we don't have to deal with continually typing in those DN attributes. So /cn equals site.com. We'll keep it very simple. We'll just say it's for the domain site.com. I guess we can keep it consistent with the other one, RSA CERT 512.com. You'll see if I hit enter here, it didn't bother asking me for all this because I specified it. And then if I do an ls, you'll see now I have a new certificate in my directory. And I can use the same inspection command that we used before to take a look at the content of this certificate, which is OpenSSL x509, feed in the certificate, no out, and text. You'll notice this certificate included the 512-bit key, again, not considered secure by today's standards. And then the subject and the issuer for this one were as I specified in the command line. Any questions on this so far?
Oh, I see what I did wrong. I had one command wrong here so I could read the output of my file, because I'm not as handy with these OpenSSL keyword switches as you are.
It's all good.
But yeah,
that's why the cheat sheet
right there with you. Right there with you. Yeah, exactly. That's why you need this thing.
So there's some more options that are included here for how to generate these certificates. You can actually generate both the certificates and the key in the same command, and the cheat sheet will kind of walk you through how to do that. Notice that to generate both the certificate and the key in the same command for elliptic curve, you have to specify an elliptic curve's parameters file, which is why we did that earlier to show you how to generate an elliptic curve parameters file. So those are just some options you have for you.
Being able to feed in all of those certificate elements from the command line just feels like this is good for scripting. If I have to do this on a routine basis,
yes, 100%.
That's why that's important to me.
100%.
Now, would this factor in if I need to renew the certificate because it's expiring? Would that be part of the equation?
You could script out the generating of it. So to renew a certificate, that means you're asking a certificate authority to sign a new certificate. So you'd have to give them a new CSR, a new certificate signing request. Okay. And you'll notice we've been using these commands over here for self-signed certificates, but the CSR commands are pretty much the exact same arguments. The only difference is using -new instead of -x509. So yes, you absolutely could use these same commands to script generating CSRs on a particular interval. And actually, you could go all the way to emailing them, depending on how the CA wants to receive the CSR. So you'd have to figure that out. But
so I suppose if I use CertBot, which I do, it's a very handy tool that automatically renews certificates. It's probably doing some of this in the background.
Oh yeah, it's a layer of abstraction. Yeah, CertBot's pretty cool. It's a neat layer of abstraction. Absolutely. Cool. So we've generated 2 certificates, both using RSA keys. The last kind of piece of this demonstration is now generating a certificate using the elliptic curve keys that we had generated earlier. So it doesn't matter which key necessarily we're going to use, but we'll do that next. So the command is exactly the same as we had in here, in here, since we already have the key file created. But we could obviously generate a new key file if we wanted to using the notes in the cheat sheet. We're going to keep it simple, and we're just going to use the key file that we've already generated. So OpenSSL req -x509, because we're generating new x509 certificates. The key we're going to use is, let's just use EC key 2. And then we're going to call this EC cert 2.pem. And then I'll specify the subject again on the command line, just so we don't have to deal with those prompts. EC cert 2.com. Am I missing anything? Nope, that looks good. Yep, cool. I took the command. If I do an ls, we'll see that now we have a new file, this guy right here. And if I take a look at the contents of that file, you'll see it'll look like any other certificate file. One thing to note is notice how much smaller it is compared to the other certificate files. We can quickly show that.
Like previously, same thing. Yeah.
You notice that one was much bigger. So again, if we're trying to put a certificate on like a little chip or whatever the case, smaller, it helps enable those options. And then to look at the content of the certificate, we'll use the same inspection command for X509 certificates. We'll feed in the CERT we just created. We'll ask for no base64 encoded output. We'll ask for the text output, and you'll see that it'll look like this. Here is the new certificate we just created using this as a subject. Notice that the public key information for this certificate was much smaller, and notice that it included both the public value from our elliptic curve key and the curve itself as well, since that's very relevant to the public key for elliptic curves.
Very good. And again, going back to your point about how elliptic curve gives us more security, less resources required computationally, is there a reason I would not use ECC and use RSA instead?
You could say supportability. RSA has been around for forever, and any device that uses SSL supports RSA. But at this point, I would say any device, any software or device created in the last 10 to 15 years really ought to support elliptic curve. And elliptic curves aren't necessarily new in that sense. So supportability is going to be pretty close to the same at this point. Yeah.
I remember using RSA keys on Cisco iOS command line. You got to generate those keys so you can fire up an SSH session, right? One of the standard build sessions for a router or a switch.
If you're still using a Cisco PIX, definitely use RSA. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Cool. Well, that's it for this section, actually. So what we've done in this section is we generated some certificates using the keys we generated in the last section. And hopefully this kind of give us some samples of how to use OpenSSL and how to feed the arguments in, and the dash in versus dash out, and all the tenets of the OpenSSL toolset. Any questions on anything we've done so far?
Well, we've talked about CSRs. Are we going to get into that?
We aren't. So I'll even quickly generate one. So this is the command we use to generate a certificate. If I do -new instead of -x509, it'll generate a CSR. Oops, I just overrided my certificate because I didn't change this, but that's okay. In fact, let's just do that again, but not overwrite the certificate. Oops. I'll regenerate the certificate, and then I'll change both the name CSR. There. And so all I'm doing here is just this side of the command, which is showing you the CSR commands. So now we have properly named the same CERT as before, although regenerated, so probably different serial number. And then this CSR over here. And the CSR inspection command, again, in the cheat sheet, if we scroll down, viewing the contents of CSRs, it's this guy right here. So we'll do OpenSSL, REQ, we'll feed in the CSR we just created, no out text, and this is the content of the CSR. You'll notice the content of the CSR, there's much less to it. It just says, hey, this is who I am. Notice there's no issuer, because this CSR is what you give to the CA, and the CA adds the issuer field if they approve the certificate. Obviously, I don't own the website eccert2.com, so if I give this to a CA, they would promptly laugh at me and not give me a certificate if they're doing their job right.
Right.
But it's going to include my public key and stuff like that. And there's different attributes and additional things that can go into the CSR. We go in full depth at CSRs in the TLS course, but.
Oh, very good.
Yeah.
Okay. We basically, this has just got the metadata needed so that a true certificate authority will issue me the certificate that I need.
Correct.
I'm not issuing it myself, but I have to give them enough information that they can do their job. And that's all that's in here.
Yeah. And the crux of it really is you need to give them your public key, because they're going to put your public key in the certificate they give you. You need to give them the common name that you're going to be using, and they need to validate that that's all real. And then if you're trying to generate a sans cert with additional entries you can verify in the address bar, you can insert those into the CSR as well. A lot of CAs these days have abstracted out even the CSR portion, where if you want a certificate for them, you just go and fill out a web form, and they'll probably generate a CSR in the background, but they may not specifically explicitly need a CSR from you. They've created a fancy web form that you can use, or APIs, whatever the case. But in the original SSL, this is how it was done.
All right, Ed, that was all great, and we'll see you in the next section.
Cool, sounds good.